all of you here are speaking Russian better than English. I know that this can be strange, but I believe that it is a good thing to be a little bit more inclusive while we are in Georgia, and it would be easier for me as well to talk about all these things in Russian, and I will struggle a little bit. I want you to excuse me for something that will not be very clear, maybe because of not well prepared English, but still I believe that we should at least try to talk not only in Russian while we are here. Let's try to play by these rules. This part was like I prepared this part. Other parts of the lecture will not be so prepared, so I will be struggling sometimes with my English. Please excuse me for that. This was the first disclaimer. The second disclaimer is that I am not a doctor. This is the medical topic, actually, and well, there are a lot of things that maybe will demand your action. You will just think that, or your action to yourself, or maybe something that you will decide you have to do to your friends, and I cannot take responsibility for that. I'm a scientist, I'm a neuroscientist, I study how our brain works, and there will be some advices what you can do. We will even start with kind of diagnostics. But once again, I'm not a doctor. There is no responsibility for me to telling you that. And please beware. I may say something that your psychotherapist or your psychiatrist would say differently, and that is okay. I will try to talk more about science, about some maybe neuroscience, some economic things that are related to depression, but once again, this is something that is really related to our everyday life, and it's hard to disentangle these things. Okay, and now we'll start with actually with some diagnostics. I will list some statements right now, and your task right now will be, the last thing to disclaim, if you have any questions, I'm okay that you interrupt me and ask them when you have it. The discussion is always better than the lecture, so please don't be afraid to ask me anything. And if something is not making any sense to you, please stop me, and we have time to discuss everything, so people won't be pushing us out of this place. I have 60 slides. That will be a lot, but I think we can live with that, because not all of them will be really a lot to discuss. Let's start with the statements. Just think now, what is your agreement, what is your percentage of agreement with these statements? That will be enough for now. So the first one, depressed mood of the day. How is the statement describe yourself at this particular point? So you are depressed, you are in depressed mood most of the day, nearly every day. It can be feeling sad or empty. It can manifest as you being tearful. It's really easy for you to burst into tears. It can be your irritation. Actually, it's a little more about teenagers, but we're not really that far from being teenagers. So how depressed are you feeling yourself? Just make a mark, 1 or 0, whether you agree with that or not. Another statement. You have diminished interest or pleasure in all or almost all activities most of the day, nearly every day. Just let you think about that. Maybe you experience significant weight loss or weight gain. Actually, it doesn't matter. Significant here means that it is Scientifically, it means that it's more than 5% of your present weight. But everything you feel significant will do right now. You have either insomnia or hypersomnia. Insomnia means that it's hard for you to sleep. Hypersomnia, it means that it's hard for you to be awake. You see how accurate and concrete are there, how accurate and precise are the depression symptoms. So it's either insomnia or hypersomnia, it's either weight gain or weight loss, and there's a lot of stuff like that. So the next thing, you have either psychomotor agitation, which means that you just move a lot. It's hard for you to stop some small movements. There's always some trembling in you, or your leg is, I don't know, you push your leg all the time or stuff like that. Or psychomotor retardation, which means that you are very slow, it's hard for you to start any action and stuff like that. You feel fatigue or loss of energy nearly every day. You experience feelings of worthlessness or excessive and inappropriate guilt nearly every day. This is a really tricky one given the situation we are right now. So remember what is inappropriate right now. So it's really things to discuss right now. You've experienced diminished ability to think or concentrate, or indecisiveness, which means that it's really hard for you to decide what to do. Once again, nearly every day. If there is parts of the week that you don't experience that, maybe this doesn't apply to you. And you have recurrent thoughts of death, and it means that it's not just fear of dying, which is okay to feel even every day, but it means of maybe something actionable you imagine somehow. All of these are the symptoms from the DSM-4. It's a diagnostic of mental state manual. Actually, it's not the latest version of this manual. Now we have DSM-5. And there are a lot of debates in the research and clinical society regarding DSM-5. It's a newer one, but not so well discussed already. So I'm giving you a little bit outdated information. But if you look at this once again, if you think that you have at least 5 of these symptoms, there's a good chance you might have a depression. And it is okay to have a depression, and it is impossible to give you a diagnosis out of just these statements. But if you, after you have read that, if you think that you might have a chance of having a depression, it is okay to go and find a specialist and discuss with a specialist with your particular situation whether it is the case. So over-diagnostics and self-diagnostics is not always a good thing. But I think that in this case, it is okay to be a little bit more cautious because depression is something that you can work with. It is you don't have to feel that way, and there are things that can help you, and so you don't have to be with these feelings with any 5 of the symptoms for your whole time. And maybe one of the last disclaimers. Now I'm being a little bit inaccurate because I'm saying the word depression, and actually, these are the symptoms of not all the depression, but only the major depressive disorder. This is not everything that we can call depression. There are other types of depression, really close actually, or maybe not so close sometimes, but like there is postpartum depression. It is the specific kind of depression that mothers feels after the child being born. There age-related depression that can be different from major depression disorder. So there are different types of depression, and today I will use these terms, major depression, depressive disorder, and depression interchangeably, because I want to talk about like something general we know about that. But there are different types of diagnosis, and I have to make this disclaimer. Okay, so I hope that we're finished with disclaimers, and let's go deeper. Once again, I want you to really get to know what depression is, so don't be afraid to ask questions. I will share all the knowledge that I have. Yeah, one more thing I want to tell you. I'm working now in a startup which is working with depression. And once again, I'm not a doctor, I'm a scientist, and I'm studying brain. My perspective is different from that of the doctor. I think that there are a lot of things that we either don't know or know, or we think of in a way we shouldn't do. This can, the therapist could tell you about the depression in a different way, and that's okay. Now we're like in a university, and we are here to discuss and ask questions. If your specialist gives you some kind of different information, you can discuss with them this new information, and well, a good specialist could can have an answer to everything that people here in this place. Maybe it's really simple for you, but I still think that this is the stuff that should be the take-home messages. First, depression is not a bad mood or, I don't know, a temporal state when you are feeling bad. It is a serious medical condition. You can treat depression and get better, even with all the questions that I will try to bring out today. There is always a possibility to get better. I will talk about brain today, but depression is not only about the brain. And it is a biopsychosocial phenomenon, biopsychosocial disorder and state of our being. And with us being here for most of us involuntary in Georgia, it is okay to feel a lot of stress because the situation demands it, and it's really a normal way to feel in this situation. Although I will talk about the brain, more than about other things. Other things also really matters, and it's just the popular science lecture, and not the a lot of disclaimers about that. This is not a therapy, so it's more about the brain, but still very sensitive thing. So I have to talk about this. My main idea, and I will try to prove it, that there are a lot of white spaces in what we know about depression, and I will focus on these white spaces maybe a little more than on what we already know. But there are a lot of stuff that we know, and as a scientist, I'm very skeptical. But I want to share with you all this things why I think we should be skeptical, but you don't have to be so skeptical. It could be much easier thing that I am now trying to show you. I hope this will be the last disclaimer. Yeah, of course.
Can you return, please?
Yeah.
Can you give an example of psychosocial and social,
By psychosocial?
Yeah, you were talking about bio, and what are the examples of psychosocial?
So first of all, social thing. We always have a diagnosis. I will talk about that closer to the end of the lecture. A diagnosis is not something really in physics. You have some materials that you that are defined by its very precise characteristics. Mental health diagnosis is not at all something like that. So what we now call depression would not be called depression 100 years ago and may not be called depression 100 years from now. So in this sense, it's social phenomena. Depression is something we are now as society decided to call depression. And actually there could be, there are different types of depression, even though I'm using this only word. It is also, in social terms, it's also your place on the distribution of all the people. And the depression is something more extreme than regular feeling of other people. This is arguable and a very difficult question, but if the whole nation suffers from, I don't know, the flood that destroys houses of everyone, and everyone feels bad about that, people with depression will be only a group of people among all of them. So it's like your place on the distribution. I will go back to that later sometime. So this is a social part of it. Then there is a psychological part of it, because depression is biological part of it. We are trying to find something that is different in the brains of a depressed person comparing to person without depression. And now we're focused on brain. Actually, I will not be talking about that, but there are also some studies that shows that it may be not only the brain, the central nervous system. It could also be a very complicated relationship between your brain and your stomach, for example. Your gut bacteria. And this is actually very interesting and important stuff. But this is about something going on in your body. But the depression is also something that is going on with your behavior. And there could be people who have some very distinctive signatures of depression in the way their brain works. But they somehow can be adapted to that in terms of their psychological state or behavior, and we wouldn't say that they have depression right now. And in this sense, this is also a psychological thing. And actually the relationship between all this stuff is really complicated. So should we say that person with very distinctive signature in the brain should be treated with, I don't know, antidepressant drugs or not? And I don't know the answer to that question, actually. And nobody now knows. But it's really important not to think only about brain, not to think only about psychological state, and not to think only about social state. So it is a very complicated mixture of all these factors. But we'll focus on biological part. But I don't want you to think only about biological part. Okay, any other questions? So let's go further. A little bit of statistics. Depression is really, as I started with, depression is not just a bad state, it is a disease, and it actually costs a lot for the society. Of course, it costs much more for the developed societies, because they have a chance to think about these kind of problems. But still, it is really something that affects how societies live. For example, for the European Union, depression costs approximately 200 billion euros a year. That's a lot. I don't know the exact, maybe if anyone knows, I don't know the exact budget of European Unions per year, but still it's considerable amount. Given that it not only costs it's in direct, it's not a direct economic cost, not only direct economic cost, it's also a lot of things that could have been done and that are not done because people are having depression. So, like, it's really a complex way how depression can slow down the societies in how they are being developed. It's not only like now the depression that we know about costs this huge amount of money, but there's also a huge misdiagnosis rate in depression. Hard to like, actually this is a very approximate number, 50%, but there are a lot of people with depression who actually are treated with depression, and it could have some side effects for them, and they're excluded maybe from their work routines and stuff like that, and it costs the society money. But it is also a lot of people who are not diagnosed, and for these people their efficiency at work could be lowered, and it could have not been lowered if they were treated well. So really, the accuracy of diagnostics is increasing every year in Europe and America, but still it's huge. And this is even more important, that average treatment efficacy is lower than 33%. Here's the word average is very important, because I will once again go deeper into that later, but the problem is not that we don't have treatment for depression. Sometimes treatment should be very person specific, and people just don't try to find a way to treat themselves long enough to find a treatment that will really work for them. Altogether, this leads to this just 33%. It could be much higher, given what we know. But by now, on average, it's just 33%. And that's not, it is actually, these statistics could be calculated in different ways, and it could be even lower than 33%. Here, I would like you to remind you that I work in a startup that tries to sell their solution to the depression. So these numbers are something that we're trying to sell. Be aware that these numbers could be calculated differently, but there are some truth in these numbers.
When you say 33%, do you mean that's the level of satisfaction?
No. It's not the satisfaction is a very different thing. 33% of efficacy means that, first of all, it is compared to placebo, so much more people get over depression, even like...
So it's double-blinded?
Yeah, it's the efficacy of the averaged different types of treatment for depression. It's really very misleading number. Like this 33 is just to impress you with that. Let me be honest. Yeah, let me be honest. It's like just a number that, different health departments used this number, but, well, it is misleading.
What's the actual number?
Actual number for what?
What's the real number?
For what?
It's real.
No, I mean, it's real in some way, but it's so complicated topic.
100 people with depression, and we treat them. How many of them?
In average, 33. This is.
Will be happy, or we'll see any.
No, happy will be like maybe 40% of them. 40% of them, maybe, but happy on what time scale? Because there's a lot of stuff. Yeah, this is a really good question, and I would like to be that kind of a discussion. So if we're looking at the depression on the scale of 6 months, there would be 40%. But the depression can be recurrent. It means that it can go over and over in one person for a lot of time. Then we'll have to lower this number, because people who recover from depression during one episode are very likely to go back to depression in future.
Or the opposite. I mean that if
No,
you
unfortunately.
measure it not in 6 months, but in a year, maybe it will be more.
No. No. Unfortunately, in 6 months,
Because
this
now-
would be a higher percentage of people who not happy but not suffer from the depression symptoms.
Okay.
Because happy is really complicated term. But for these people, they can recover from one episode of depression, but their current rate is high. If you had it once, there's really a good chance that you will experience it once again during your lifetime. And there's no actual scientific evidence on that. But I would dare to say that every time you have depression, it increases your chance to go back to your depression because it's biopsychosocial. Every time you have depression, it lowers your societal chances to go back to normal life. You will have less money, you will have less friends, and it's like a vicious circle where actually specific treatment can pull you out of this circle. But how really to calculate that is, well, it's complicated. So yeah, the number is misleading, but it shows us like that it's a huge problem for people. And another important problem is that it's not fair for the society in terms of actually it's much higher in minorities. And here, I would suggest that this is because of the societal pressure that a lot of different types of minorities have. But even if we're not talking about minorities, it's really, once again, a question regarding the gender rights and stuff like that. Depression is twice as high in women as it is in men. And women tend to have twice as high severe symptoms as men. Different theories about that. It could be related to biology. It could be related to the pressure to women. We really don't know that, but it is the case right now. And this is what scientists try to go deeper into. Any questions? I'm open to discussion. Okay, but we won't talk about the depression in society because it's it's okay.
Can you move back?
Move back? Okay. I can share with you the presentation. It's
Okay.
so just tell me where to send it. I will share it with you. Nothing secret about that. And this is actually, I think, from one of the WHO sites or something like that. So it's really the first thing that you will see when you just Google depression. But it's important. Still, I think that it's important. So today, my idea is to talk about the depression in the brain. And well, I think that you may have heard something about the depression. So, and I'm interested. What is your view? What do you think? How do you see? What have you heard about the brain mechanisms of depression? I just wonder if there are any view of the depression in the brain that you have.
Your dopamine just goes down. You just don't feel yourself like I'm happy enough. And your body just adjusts to this level.
Okay. Any other suggestions?
Lower activity of the brain.
Lower activity of the brain, well, very general, but you can say that.
To study, to concentrate, to memorize something.
Impossibility to concentrate.
Yeah, this is was one of the symptoms, and it is, but it's not the only. Like the brain really struggles with concentrating with all the diseases it have. Like it's the first thing that breaks within the brain. This is the most important that our brain can do, and it's really something that breaks first. Okay, anything else?
You told that people sometimes have problems with their stomach. I think it depends on the brain too.
What do you mean?
When you can't eat or you eat so much, I think it depends on it.
Anything else?
Classically, I think it's classic theory about that. It's three neuromediators so involved. So serotonin, dopamine, and noradrenaline.
Yeah, this is something that I would like to, actually I wanted to hear. The serotonin theory of depression, I think, is one of the most popular. Actually, dopamine is mentioned somewhere, but I think it's not like that popular. And well, for some time it was one of the main theories of depression, that it is related to the serotonin in your brain. Serotonin is one of the neuromediators, the chemicals that our brain uses to communicate between different type of neurons. There were a lot of studies that led to that hypothesis. One of them, I think, that should have been popular was related to low serotonin levels, low levels, not of the serotonin, but of the receptors that catch serotonins within the cells in the brain of people who committed suicide. This was the very popular study. There were some other studies I will go to. Actually, if you're talking about, I think, 80% of mental health diseases, you will hear these three names: serotonin, dopamine, and maybe noradrenaline or some other third neuromediator, and it's never like that. I mean, every time you hear that this is some kind of any explanation where you have just one type of sorry,
Chemical agent.
not only chemical agent, one not only mediator. Sorry, this is where I'm sorry about my English. One solution to any problem, one source of the problem. It won't be like that if we're talking about the brain. So it's never like that. If we're talking about serotonin, actually there are 14 types, and this is just what I remember, being not the expert in serotonin as well, as it is. Like 14 types of receptors to serotonin, and which one of them is related to depression and which are not, it's really complicated. Actually, serotonin is as important as it is in the brain, within our other parts of our body. For example, it is related to digesting. I don't really an expert in that part, and I don't know what its functions in the stomach, but it is related to our digestion. And this is not related to this gut-brain axis that you can have heard about. It's like very different thing. With the dopamine, the situation is the same. It's not only in the brain, it's also in the body, and it's always like that. And maybe since you have heard about the dopamine, or which is a little bit, in my opinion, more advanced than serotonin, if we're talking about the brain mechanisms of depression, you may have heard, it was a lot of news like that a month ago, that the serotonin theory of depression have failed. Have you heard about that? Maybe it was somewhere on the brink of your eye. You just seen the news and maybe forgot about that right now. But actually it was a huge news across, not scientific, but across public media. BBC, Economist even said that a popular medical explanation for depression was rebuffed, as they say here. But it was not popular in science for maybe more than a decade. Like it was maybe a final nail in the coffin of the certain theory of depression, but it was not very popular for, well, actually more than a decade. And here is the interesting story, because a lot of people seen that news and decided, well, but how the antidepressants would work if the serotonin theory of the depression was rebuffed, was I don't know, debunked or something like that. And the problem here is that the story between the medicine, the treatment for actually not only depression and not only mental health diseases, but other diseases as well, is very complicated. It's not always the case that the way the drug works is really related to the disease it is associated with. And even if the drug works, it doesn't mean that it works in the way scientists and doctors think it works. There's a lot of examples of that. I will just give you one small example, how it works, how it has worked in psychiatry. How we think it should work. There was in 60s maybe the monoamine hypothesis of depression. Monoamines are the group of chemicals, dopamine, serotonin, noradrenaline. They actually just, each one is the later stage of the cycle of development of the previous one, so they're really related. In the 60s, people understood that it should be somehow related to our behavior, and a lot of different theories about these neuromediators appeared. So in the late 60s, it was a theory proposed by Schildkraut. This led to the invention of monoamine antidepressants, and there are like maybe a little less than a dozen of them right now, and they work. The thing that, I will give you some numbers, but they work better than placebo, and this is out of question. So these were really good. They work not that higher than the placebo, but still we're sure that they work. What should this mean? Antidepressants work, the theory is true, but it's not like that. Actually, we're still uncovering the mechanisms why it actually works. Some recent studies showed that maybe these actually very complicated molecules could have affected different types of receptors that we have anticipated. And maybe this is the mechanisms of their work. But they don't mean the fact that some drug work doesn't mean that the theory that led to the invention of this drug was really precise. And the depression is one more example of this. So the certain theories of depression is debunked, but this doesn't mean that antidepressants wouldn't work. So, no.
Can you repeat, please, what is monoamine?
It's, I'm not a chemist, so it's at least noradrenaline, dopamine, and serotonin are the chemicals that share the fact that they have amine group in their chemical structure. This is one amine group in their chemical structure. Their production within the brain share the same mechanisms, and not only the production within the brain, like they are synthesized from more or less the same constituents, from the same building blocks. And actually also the way they are for the brain and for the body, it's important not only to produce the chemical, but also to put it out of the neurons, put it out of the places where they work. So the mechanisms of producing and disintegrating these chemicals share a lot in common. Noradrenaline, dopamine, serotonin, there are more in this actually list. I wouldn't go deeper into that because it's not my expertise really. Yeah, but all these three, they have very important roles within the brain and within the body, and so given that they have same close chemical structure, they are in one group. Actually, the fact that they're in the close chemical group doesn't mean that they should be biologically close. It shouldn't be the case. So it's really different levels of the system, and it could be very different, but they have something in common. Yeah. Okay. So one example where the same idea, like the same story, that something may work, but doesn't mean that we understand the mechanisms, is the dopamine theory of schizophrenia. And here it's a little bit more popular and a little bit easier story to understand. So in 50s and early 60s, if we're talking about depression, the story was like that. It was first some understanding of how serotonin works in the brain, then theory, then drugs. So very logical. But when we're talking about health, it's not always like that. The story about schizophrenia is different. In early 60s, the effects of L-DOPA was discovered. L-DOPA is actually the predecessor of dopamine. Once again, it's close to monoamine groups. L-DOPA is from this chemical. The dopamine is synthesized within the brain, but it's not part of the neurotransmitters, and it's easy to produce in the lab. And for some time it was very interesting chemical that doctors tried to use in very different situations. And also there's a wonderful story, so the idea, you got it, that the idea that this drug goes with schizophrenia is actually wrong. And there's a wonderful story about that, which I can just send you to. If you have seen the movie Awakenings, you know a little bit about that. If you haven't, it's a wonderful movie which I really recommend you to see. It's the great role of Robin Williams. And there's also a book by Oliver Sacks, who is one of the greatest neurological writers of the 20th century. So he was actually the man who discovered very unpurposely the effects of L-DOPA. He tried to use this drug for people who suffered from Spanish flu. Like in 50s, he was a doctor in a department where there were a lot of people for whom the Spanish flu led to neurological side effects, and they became people in vegetable states. So they were for decades without any movements. Like this was a desperate department in the hospital, and Oliver Sacks was like, I don't know, he wasn't an intern there, he was a very young doctor, and they tried a lot of different stuff in these patients. One of these things was L-DOPA, and it was really a miracle, and this is very, at one side, inspiring story, but really very complicated story. So they found out that given this person's L-DOPA, for some time, for some it was months, for some it was a couple of years, they put people back out of vegetable states to real persons. So they really were awakened from their decade-length sleep. And for some people, they were trying with dosages of L-DOPA. And for some people, they found out that higher dosages led to symptoms that really reminded the schizophrenia, positive schizophrenia symptoms for the doctors. And it was just this occasional notion that led to the dopamine theory of schizophrenia, because a lot of L-DOPA led to dopamine, dopamine led to schizophrenia types of symptoms, and for a couple of decades after that, people were trying to understand whether the changes in dopamine system led to schizophrenia. Actually, dopamine really plays a role in schizophrenia, but now we understand that this is like one of maybe 1% of what's going on there. We know that it's much more complicated. But basically, it was not only the L-DOPA that gave that symptoms, but also the inhibitors of L-DOPA, so the chemicals that worked in opposite to L-DOPA, reduced the symptoms in schizophrenia patients. And these drugs are still used maybe a newer version of these drugs are still used in for schizophrenics, but we turned down the dopamine theory of schizophrenia even before we turned down the certain theory of depression. So it's really complicated, and a lot of things that we know from maybe popular culture about these mental health problems actually don't work that way. Actually, to tell you the truth, like I'm working in this field for maybe a year now, and I know what's going on in that field right now. But a year ago, while I was in a close but very different field of neuroscience, actually I wouldn't even try to talk about depression, because even though I have been taught a lot about that when I was in the university 10 years ago, for these 10 years, a lot of things have happened that really I don't rely on my professional knowledge about that. And this is a huge problem in that field. Science is going very fast, and it's really hard to get the information as fast as it's changing. And so this is the problem. So everything is very complicated. But what, yeah, this is the main idea of the lecture. But a little bit of what's going on with the depression studies today. So today, the main idea is that the depression is within the brain. We still are somewhat there. Like, it was not always the case that people thought that depression is somewhere in the brain. Like, ancient Greek thought that it related to, I don't know, to placenta in women. Like there were a lot of different theories about depression. But for last 100 years, we believe that it's something in the brain. Maybe in 50 years from now, the gut part of this theory would become more important, and maybe, I don't know, something within our body would be seen as the more important part of the depression. But now we still believe that this is in the brain. But now we don't think that we can describe such a complex disease in terms of neuromediators. We think that now actually all the diseases lie somewhere in the relationship between different brain areas. And here you can see some of the pictures you can find in, like, this is from the study which was published a year ago. Here we, first of all, we see that here are different areas that is hypothesized to be related to different types of depression, different colors, I mean in these different brain networks, which should be specifically connected to different types of depression symptoms. And this square with different colors, it's a way to describe all the connections between pairs of brain areas that we have in the brain. So basically, the less useful for the science, but more pretty pictures here on the right to you. Today we think that brain connections between hundreds of areas are something that we should look into if we want to understand depression. Actually, of course, it's really hard to discover something in this complicated picture. And here, maybe this picture reminds you of something or gives you an idea of something different where you have heard of the maybe methods to describe it. So maybe it reminds you of some other system that you are well aware of. What do you think? This so actually it's a network here we have nodes and connections between these nodes. So any ideas where things can work more or less the same? Yeah.
Internet, also artificial neural networks.
Yeah.
Social networks.
Yeah, absolutely. 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 Now is the time where we use network approach, network theory, to understand very different types of complex systems. Here we use algorithms and procedures that are used to study social networks and that are used for study, for example, web, World Wide Web, and ideas that led Google to create algorithms for going through web pages are used in the brain studies to discover how it can be related to different types of depression symptoms. So everything as we think right now is related to connectivity, and it's really interesting how this thing merges together. Like complex systems, as we think of them now, really work more or less the same. And it would be a very interesting other topic, the similarities between different types of networks in very different systems. But today we think that a lot of stuff that is related to depression is related to brain connectivity within the prefrontal areas. Prefrontal areas is actually the areas that, so someone said that depression is about the inability to concentrate. And actually prefrontal cortex, it's about a lot of stuff in our behavior, but maybe if we should say what is the most important that prefrontal cortex do, it helps us concentrating. And differences in connectivity within these areas are also related to depression. But for the last 10 years, maybe every 2 years, there are articles that, there are papers that tries to say, we found new biomarker of depression. And this is something that the startup I work in also tries to do, find new biomarkers of depression. But if you look at the review articles, every couple of years there's new review article that says we still don't have definitive biomarkers of depression. Unfortunately, it's like that right now. It's somewhere in these connections. Maybe some advances in the network theory, in the way we study social networks, will help us find method to understand what depression is. But right now, we're just in a way to discover that. But the thing that we are starting to understand, actually it's not a very new thing, but it's something that we can now address precisely, is the idea that actually the depression is not just one thing. And even like I'm saying that major depressive disorder, I'm not talking about all of the depression subtypes, but even this MDD, it's not just one thing. And today people are really interested in trying to uncover, to discover different types of depression, and the way we think about it right now is actually related to this very different efficiency of different types of drugs for different people. As I said before, if we try to average somehow different types of treatments, the efficacy is very low. But it is actually, if we're talking about the very recent study published maybe less than a month ago, said that currently about 15% of participants have a substantial antidepressant effect beyond the placebo in clinical trials, which is really low. But some other research shows that it can be related to the fact that for people it takes from 6 to 12 and more months to find treatment that will work for them. And this is like not everyone can wait for these 12 months to try one by one different types of treatment. Unfortunately, right now there's also a so-called treatment-resistant group for which we just don't know what works at all. Like everything has been tried on them and still anything works. But something is working but very experimental and with a lot of side effects. But even this 12 months that we have right now for finding the right treatment lower down this average treatment efficacy. It means that if we find a way to match people different types of different subtypes of depression with different drugs, maybe we'll increase the efficiency of the treatment, and this is what people now try to do. So we believe that there should be different types of depression, and I will tell you about at least one of these theories of what different types of depression there are. Like there's maybe a dozen of such theories, but I think that the most popular and the most trustworthy by now is this one, where we believe that actually there are two very different parts of depression. If you remember, when we were talking about the symptoms from the diagnostic manual, there were things like weight loss or weight gain, psychomotor retardation or psychomotor agitation. And well, that's strange. Don't you agree? It's really strange that very an opposite symptoms, if we just differ from the median, they means that we're depressed. It should be a hint for us that depression should have some different subtypes. And actually the main theory is that there are at least two different types of depression, which is anhedonia type of depression and anxiety type of depression. The first one is related to the overall decrease in our activity, in our we have more passive state of our brain at all, which is accompanied by weight loss, psychomotor retardation, and a lot of stuff like that. We are just closer to vegetable state, where we just lie on the bed. I had a friend who had a depressive episode where for maybe closer to a year, he left his room for less than once a week. His mother, he was a student at that time, his mother brought him food to his room, and he was lying in his room for closer to a year. Unfortunately for him, it was not a major depressive disorder, it was a bipolar disorder, which is something very different and with maybe different mechanisms, where you know that bipolar disorder is where you have not only depression episodes but also the activation episodes, maniac episodes, and really it can be a different story. So this, even if we're talking about the depression, which is generally not related to manic episodes, we still have anhedonia type of subtype of depression and anxiety type of depression, which is more about very irritable state, where you are not apathetic, you really worry a lot about what is going on. It can also lead to not a lot of actions, like you trying to stay in your room, but with very different feelings inside. So one part is you don't feel a lot, other type you feel a lot, but you just don't show it because you're afraid of what you're feeling. And this could be at least one part of the depression, and there are now a lot of studies that tries to match different type of antidepressants with at least these two different subtypes of depression. But actually there are also other things that people now try to do with the depression. And it's not only depression today is not only about antidepressants, it's not only about drugs, but there are a lot of other things that you can try to do with depression, which is in America or Europe is not the first line of evidence. So these are some more experimental treatments that are recommended for you to use when other types didn't work. And well, some words about that. So, other types of treatment are related to our newer first understanding of depression, that it's not only about neurochemicals, it's much more about the functional relationship within the brain, and we now have a lot of means to try to alter that functional relationship. And maybe the most promising among all these methods are the method that could sound frightening, but it's actually pretty safe. Well, at least it's what we know about it right now. It's maybe 30 years of research that shows us that it is pretty safe. And there is maybe a decade of research that shows that it can be very effective in terms of treating depression. So it is repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation, and the idea here is that we have found this localization of depression which is within prefrontal cortex, and we can try to somehow alter its state by applying directed magnetic stimulation to depression. So we actually have a magnet that have a burst of there's a magnetic field that we can put to the brain, and the brain, being an electrochemical organ, actually changes its state because it is in this directed magnetic stimulation. Sounds a little bit frightening. Actually, if you see some demonstrations of this magnetic stimulation, it is now precise enough for us to turn on or turn off the speech centers in our brain. And if you have this thing, if I have this thing, I can, without any side effects, just bring it closer to you, turn it on, and make you apathetic in terms of, like, meaning that you won't be able to say a word while this thing turned on. It is like it only takes less than a minute to recover from that if I put it out.
Will you be able to talk yourself at that time?
Don't think so. Like
No.
inner speech, I don't know, but I think there should be studies about that. And no, I don't think.
No, I don't mean inner speech, but if you use it on me, does it work on you as
No,
well?
no, no. It's very like the thing here is that it's very directed. Like it doesn't work for the whole room. It's like very short place where which it can reach. Actually, it can go deep into the brain areas. It's only about the cortex, so it really decays very fast. This magnetic field, so like centimeters, and only closer to the scalp. Like it works. Fortunately, the depression is related to prefrontal areas, which are where the brain is close to the skull. But if it was I don't know, some phobic diseases, which we know how to treat in different ways. But if it were something deep in the brain, this thing wouldn't work. But so the idea here is that this one-time application of this magnetic field changes your brain a bit. But if you have repetitive in terms of like on off, and repetitive in terms of like once a week stimulation, it is somehow training your brain to work differently. And this is very promising thing if we're talking about the depression. So now it is FDA approved. FDA is Federal Drug Administration in America. And if they say something is approved, it means that there is a lot of clinical evidence with double-blind, placebo-controlled studies which shows the efficiency of this stuff. Still, it's not the first line of the treatment. Now we think that drugs works better, but you have to take into consideration that this medical system is very conservative and very slow, and there are a lot of evidence that is accumulating right now, and I believe that in maybe a decade from now it would be in some cases more preferable than drugs in terms of treating depression. This is maybe the one most promising thing if we're talking about depression treatment, but there are other stuff that is being tried. Yeah.
Where you can find those treatments?
I don't know where you can find it in Georgia. It is like there are centers, for example, in Moscow, research centers, first of all, where there are these magnetic stimulators. It's complicated, but not that complicated. Like, it's doable to buy it. I mean that this is medical apparatus, which is expensive, but well, you can buy it. I think there should be at least one in Georgia, for example.
In Russia, patients use it?
No. In Russia, like, it is conservative even for America, where it's like something very innovative. In Russia, there are neurology institute in Moscow where there are people who works with it, and they also do research in the field of depression, trying different protocols of this stimulation and trying to understand, are there any side effects, or what people experience better, so for whom it works better than for others. And but these apparatus came to Russia maybe 10 years ago, something like that. And 10 years is not a lot if we're talking about approving it by health industry. So in Russia, no, it's very something like, and it's not only about Russia. Like FDA, researchers and scientists know that if it is FDA approved, it's really good. But in any country, the medical regulation is really complicated, and to get the working drug from different country being sold in your country, like it can take you a decade at least. And even in America, it's still innovative. Like, so it would take.
When did FDA approve that?
First, it approved it in 2008 that it is safe. Then it was, I think, 2015 that it's can be like some line of treatment in depression. So it's like last 10 years. And it's, once again, it's a lot of regulation. It could have approved it for this small case, and it doesn't mean that it works in every, like, we could try that for treatment-resistant depression patients. So there's a lot of stuff, like, we'll see how this thing is going to be much more popular. And here maybe I'm a little bit less skeptical than I should be. There are a lot of stories that something that has been proven in research, and that something that has even been approved by FDA really worked like not that well. There's a lot of marketing there. There's a lot of money in there that actually makes the situation much more complicated. But I believe that in 10, 20 years, this thing would be much more in common than it is now. A lot of proof I see, but don't forget to be skeptical. Don't start to believe me right now. There are also other stuff that are still in use. For example, when I found out that electroconvulsive therapy is still in use in America, I was shocked. It was not meant to be a joke, but I was really shocked when I heard about electroconvulsive therapy. If you don't know what it is, have you seen Flying Over Cuckoo's Nest? This is the kind of thing that, with different, of course, apparatus and not so harsh as it was back then, is still somewhere in line of treatment that you can try if you are, for example, depression treatment resistant. So, and there is and it's not bad thing, because for some people it doesn't always turn you into a vegetable. For some people it really works, and of course there is not so much electricity put on one's head right now, but it still could be frightening. But for some people depression is much worse than their symptoms are much more bearable than than they were depressed. Like side effects are less than their depression symptoms. And it's actually always the case if we're talking about mental health therapy. Like you must have heard about these operations where people's part of the brain were disconnected from each other with the knife, like a lobotomy. It is now we see that as something very cruel to people. And of course, if we now do that, that's true. Now we have much better ways to help people live. But if we're talking about mental therapy, sometimes the symptoms that people, the state that people experience is so hopeless that even something that people would at least not, I don't know, beat their head against the wall would be better for them than doing nothing. And lobotomy was really something that helped people in the beginning of 20th century. So the situation is complicated, really. So electroconvulsive therapy is still in use. Another thing that is being researched right now is vagus nerve stimulation. Vagus nerve is the longest nerve in our body. It's autonomous nervous system, the huge nerve that is related to a lot of parts within our body, and somehow when we, and maybe this is about not only the brain being important for depression, somehow repetitive stimulation, not of the brain, but of this nerve that make our body work right, make people feel better with depression. This can be interesting. Not so FDA approved, but well, maybe prove something later.
How it's stimulated? By what?
It could be actually, there are different ways. You can have a bracelet that would stimulate it. You can have a, I don't know, something on your neck that will stimulate it. Actually, it has a lot of places in your body there you can reach it, and you can just apply electric stimulation to your body in some place. Actually, it is also the scientific question where it is better to apply it. So you can find different places. It's like throughout the whole body.
Is this nerve located like everywhere in the body?
Not everywhere, but it's really spread throughout most of the body. Like if you look, I will put a picture later for that, because like most of your body is innervated by this nerve. It's one of you. Actually, you know that in Russian. It's the English lecture, блуждающий нерв. You have heard this word. It's really something that is throughout the whole body. Another thing that is used for some patients is deep brain stimulation. So it is also the electrical, now not magnetic, but electrical stimulation of the brain. But here it is interesting that it's located in very specific brain areas related to dopamine and serotonin, but it is a small transmitter that was surgically put into your brain. And this is why it's not so like it's the fourth maybe line of treatment, because only for people that have either other neurological disorders or so severe symptoms that for them it is okay to have neurosurgical operations, we can try to do that, this deep brain stimulation. But still, this is also the thing that can help with depression. Maybe once again, this has given us some hints that there are so many different types of depression. We have to describe later in the research. And another one which is very popular, which is becoming very popular, and is promising, it is neurofeedback. Maybe has anyone heard about neurofeedback? Once again, it's a matter of another lecture. It is a way to first read the signals of your brain online, and then to return these signals to you, so that you can try to control these signals. So you have something put on your brain, you have the signal from your brain how it works, and then you look, for example, at the picture. The picture goes brighter if your, I don't know, alpha rhythm within the brain goes higher, and goes darker if it goes lower, and you just try to concentrate and to control these brain rhythms within your brain. Actually, there's a feedback loop that starts to work in this situation, and it gives hope that you actually can control this stuff within the brain that you, in other case, didn't have access to, but it is far from FDA approval, mainly because it's really hard to get placebo-controlled study in that. The placebo is so efficient when we're talking about stuff like that, that it's hard to beat the placebo. This doesn't mean that it doesn't work, but this is about what we compare it to. So if you see that, it's okay, it's scientific and promising, but remember that it is promising for last 4 decades maybe, and still there's not enough evidence to say that it really should be used in the case of depression. But there are also one more thing that also work at least as good as antidepressants, and actually the best way to treat depression is to remember that it's not only biological in its source, but psychological as well. And there are a lot of studies that shows that different types of psychotherapy is also efficient in terms of depression. If we're talking about depression, good placebo-controlled studies were published for cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, EMDR therapy, mindfulness techniques. But once again, the situation here is close to the one that I was talking about with the neurofeedback. It's really hard, if we're talking about psychotherapy, to have control group, to have to disentangle placebo effects from the effects of therapy. So there are a lot of other therapies that looks really promising, and you can treat your depression with the therapy. Actually, the best way to treat it is to go to the therapist, and if it is a good therapist, if he see some specific symptoms, he would send you to a psychiatrist who would prescribe you antidepressants, and the best way to treat it is to address both biological level and psychological level. And here you will not only do something with your brain that will make it work better, but you will also find some routines, some ways not to fall to depression later, to what to do when you are in the depression, to experience less severe symptoms, not to lose your friends and stuff like that. So actually the best way is to address it in different modalities. So I would really recommend you visiting or advising the therapist as well. Actually, as I was saying, it's not only about biology, it's also about psychology and sociology. And one more important thing that I'm not talking about is actually decreasing the stigma about depression. We now think that depression or mental health in general is something you have to be ashamed of. The situation is changing, but well, it used to be like that for centuries. And this, your question was about what is social in depression. The stigma that we have in depression that makes one part of this vicious circle is also the thing that makes it so complicated disorder. And so addressing the stigma is important, thinking about your behavior, about your routines, about your standard way to deal with the problem is important, and sometimes drugs or some electrical stimulation to your brain can also be important. So let me stop here. Do you have any questions?
Будет ли аналог на русском языке?
No. Unfortunately, I can share you the presentation and I can give you information where to look at about the depression, but I don't think that in future month I will be able to repeat this in Russian, unfortunately. So sorry. There are a lot of information about that in Russian, and I will try to maybe make a list. And I don't know, are there any, Mish, are there any, Mish, are there any, maybe you know, public of auditoria or stuff like so where I can share you online the materials to look into?
You can take and comment on YouTube.
So there is the YouTube translate.
Public too.
Yeah, so I will have a list in Russian where to look at and just share it with you. So any other questions?
What is EMDR therapy?
We've just actually, it's a funny story. We've just discussed today it in a professional chat in Telegram that it is related to the eye movements. EMDR, eye movements related. This desensibilization. It is the idea is that. There are some specific patterns of our eye movements that we can try to use to start feeling less emotions about some specific situations. Some people actually don't believe that these studies is really related to eye movements. Some people think that it's kind of a cognitive behavioral stuff, and it's just some kind of training that is not specific to eye movements. But studies now show efficiency of this type of therapy, and that's why this is in the list. So it's about how you automatically process information, and the idea is that you can at least somehow change these automatic processes, and that will lead to some positive outcome.
It's also about practice bilateral stimulation like this. Do you know it?
Yeah, actually,
It's popular
yeah,
practice now.
yeah, I don't know whether it should work like, but there are studies that I can't disregard that shows that, well, this works. I think that the mechanisms should be much more indirect that people claim to be, but still, well, you can try that. If it works for you better than any other thing, then it's worth doing that. Any other questions? Because there are some more, even more philosophical stuff, if you are ready for that, about these biopsychosocial things. But if someone need a break, you can just ask your questions now and leave, because I got a little bit, a little deeper into the sources of depression that I think would be good, but I wanted to try at least that. Any other questions? Yeah.
Do I understand right that so now main theory of depression is that I mean these drugs, serotonin and other, they do not
We just don't know what they do actually.
Well,
the problem is that actually we have some hypothesis why they work, but now we're not sure.
No, I mean, but I heard that they do not work itself, but they create some condition in brain which allows it to grow these networks.
Yeah, one more. You're talking about neurogenesis and neuroplasticity, that they somehow start the reorganization of the brain. And actually one study was showing that maybe, like I was telling about that serotonin antidepressant drugs were related not to receptors to serotonin, but to these receptors that start neuroplasticity effects within the brain. Yeah, so reorganization within the brain, and maybe it works like that, but we're not really sure about that. It is, I would say, the main hypothesis, but we're not really sure. And I would stress that I never said theory of depression besides debunking the certain theory. I wouldn't say that now we have a theory of depression. We have a lot of different suggestions of the mechanisms of different parts of depression and symptoms, but now people wouldn't say that they have a theory of depression. And that's important. That is how our understanding of it grew to much more complicated than it was.
One more question. I heard that the drug ketamine is now...
Yeah, this is one of the... Yeah. Ketamine, psilocybin, what else? Like, they are promising. Too experimental to include into this lecture, because like it goes with a lot of societal stereotypes about these types of drugs. It could be not only negative but also too positive stereotypes. Like there are a lot of studies about not only psilocybin but other types of hallucinogenic drugs that may be really promising treatment for depression, but I'm trying to avoid that because it is related with too many like other things that I can't cover in this lecture.
What about your startup?
We try to actually do the thing that we try to find depression subtypes from brain activity. We try to focus on something that is quite easy to measure. We focus on the electrical brain activity, which gives quite a lot of information to try to subtype it, which is quite cheap and which can be found. It's much cheaper than, for example, magnetic stimulation. It's much cheaper than functional magnetic resonance imaging. So EEG you can find in, first of all, in any hospital in America and Europe, in a lot of hospitals in Georgia and in Russia. There are now even much cheaper things that you can connect to your mobile phone, but it's questionable. Would it be enough, this kind of apparatus? So we'll try to find different subtypes from that activity and then match it to the existing drugs. So we try to make the existing... So more individualized, personalized treatment with the drugs that are already in the market, and maybe after some time it will help to test new drugs in clinical trials, and it will be cheaper for pharma to have new trials. So we'll have our money from pharma that will just reduce their budget with some of our advancements. Any other questions? Okay, so my suggestion would be like that. It's now 1 hour and a half. I think that this is enough for the lecture. But if you're interested, let's have a 5-minute break, and I'll go to this philosophical discussion. But this will be out of a recorded lecture, and I will turn to Russian. Because for me it will be also much easier to discuss that philosophical stuff in Russian than in English. So if you have any other questions about the things I already told you, I'm ready to answer. Waiting a second. Are there any questions? So if not, let's have a pause and let's return to some philosophy that we can discuss later. Thank you very much. При желании кто